The 1960s were a golden age for American cars, but not every model from the Blue Oval lived up to the era's promise. Behind the chrome and horsepower were some serious missteps: flawed designs, underpowered engines, mechanical nightmares, and forgotten flops that left buyers disappointed and Ford dealers scrambling. In this countdown, we're diving into the 30 worst Fords of the 60s, vehicles that fell short, broke down, or simply didn't belong on the road. Number 30. 1964 Ford Thunderbird. The 1964 Ford Thunderbird marked a jarring departure from the sporty, lean two-seat coupe that had turned heads in the 1950s. Once envisioned as a direct rival to the Chevrolet Corvette, the T-Bird had, by its fourth generation, morphed into a bloated boulevard cruiser that abandoned its athletic roots. With a curb weight surpassing 500 pounds and dimensions creeping toward full-size territory, the 64 Thunderbird was no longer the nimble personal luxury car Ford once proudly sold. Performance took a nosedive, with even the top-tier 390 cubic-inch V8 struggling under the car's increasing mass. Handling was predictably sluggish, with numb steering and ponderous cornering. Critics slammed its soft, floaty ride and uninspired driving dynamics. The once distinctive styling had dulled too, giving way to a more slab-sided, conservative shape that didn't inspire much excitement. While it boasted comfort features like power accessories and plush interiors, these came at the expense of driver engagement or youthful appeal. Owners also reported frustrating issues with the car's complex electrical system, particularly the swing-away steering column, which became a recurring failure point. Rust protection was below average, and the heavy doors and body panels put a strain on the under-engineered hinges and supports. By trying to appeal to older, wealthier buyers, Ford alienated the very audience that once celebrated the Thunderbird as a statement of sporty elegance. The 1964 model became a cautionary tale of brand identity lost, a flashy cruiser that no longer had a soul. In hindsight, it marked the beginning of the T-Bird's long slide into irrelevance. Number 29's 1968 Ford Cortina MK Roman II. Imported from Ford of Britain, the 1968 Cortina MK Roman II was an earnest attempt to offer an economical, compact alternative during a time when small imports were gaining traction in the American market. Unfortunately, it quickly became clear that the Cortina wasn't built for U.S. roads or U.S. expectations. While its tidy dimensions and simple engineering worked in Europe, American buyers found it underpowered, cheaply assembled, and prone to serious durability issues. The 1.6L Kent four-cylinder engine, while modestly reliable, was wholly inadequate for American highway speeds, and the lack of insulation and soundproofing made long-distance driving an unpleasant, noisy ordeal. Ride comfort was below par, and the car's lightweight construction made it feel flimsy compared to domestic compacts like the Ford Falcon or Dodge Dart. The real trouble, however, started with corrosion. The Cortina became infamous for rust, particularly in the fenders, rockers, and floors, often appearing within just a couple of years. Quality control varied wildly, with reports of misaligned panels, electrical glitches, and leaky seals. Dealerships were ill-equipped to service the British-built cars, and parts availability proved a persistent issue. In cold climates, they aged quickly and poorly, earning them a reputation as disposable cars. American buyers who took a chance on the Cortina were often left disillusioned, and resale values plummeted accordingly. By 1970 U.S., Cortina sales had collapsed, and Ford quietly pulled the plug on the model stateside. Despite its success in Europe, the Cortina MK Roman II served as a harsh reminder that simply shipping a car across the Atlantic didn't make it competitive in America. In hindsight, it was a rust-prone, fragile import that never stood a chance. Number 28. 1964 Mercury Marauder Park Lane. Introduced as Mercury's bid to enter the burgeoning performance luxury segment, the 1964 Marauder, particularly in Park Lane trim, aimed to blend muscle car bravado with premium trappings. Unfortunately, it ended up being neither fast nor particularly desirable. Based on Mercury's full-size chassis, the Marauder was a massive coupe weighing in at over 2 tons, and while it came with Ford's 390, 406, and even 427 V8, the car's bulk and soft suspension severely muted any excitement those engines could offer. Its styling failed to generate buzz, especially when compared to the more aggressive looks of GM's Pontiac Grand Prix or even its corporate cousin, the Galaxy 500 XL. The Marauder's uninspired slab-sided body, combined with a weak marketing push, led to confusion about what the car was trying to be. It didn't handle like a muscle car, nor did it coddle passengers like a Cadillac. Buyers simply shrugged. Critics called out the Marauder's vague steering and subpar braking performance. The large displacement engines provided decent straight-line acceleration, but the car's overall driving dynamics were dull and uninvolving. Adding to its woes, interior fit and finish was only average, and build quality inconsistencies plagued early production units. Owners reported premature drivetrain vibrations and issues with the optional multi-drive Merco-matic transmission. Sales were disappointing, especially for a model intended to elevate Mercury's image. Buyers flocked instead to the sleeker, more compelling Pontiac Grand Prix or to Ford's own muscle-flavored offerings. After 1965, the Marauder quietly exited the lineup, overshadowed and largely forgotten. Today, the Park Lane Marauder stands as an awkward misfire, a muscle car wannabe weighed down by the limitations of its own bloated platform. Number 27. 1965 Ford Falcon second generation. When the Ford Falcon debuted in 1960, it was a sales triumph, a straightforward, compact alternative to the oversized sedans of the era. But by 1965, things had changed dramatically. The Mustang had arrived just months earlier, stealing the Falcon's thunder in every way. Suddenly, the Falcon seemed like yesterday's car, dowdy, uninspired, and out of step with a market hungry for excitement. Ford attempted to refresh the Falcon for 1965 with a modest redesign, featuring squared-off lines and more chrome. But the changes were too subtle to make an impact. Underneath, it was still the same basic car with outdated mechanicals and limited performance potential. Engine options topped out with a 289 V8, but the car's platform wasn't designed to handle it well. Handling was uninspiring, and the steering remained vague and unresponsive, especially compared to the Mustang's tighter, sportier dynamics. Customers noticed. Falcon sales nosedived in 1965, plummeting by nearly 50%. The car's image as a sensible compact had been thoroughly eclipsed by the Mustang's aura of freedom and flair. Meanwhile, the Falcon's outdated styling and uninspiring driving experience gave younger buyers little reason to choose it. Even its role as a family second car was being challenged by newer competitors from Plymouth and Chevrolet. Mechanically, the Falcon was still serviceable, but owners reported common issues with rust and fading interiors. The build quality was mediocre, and as soon as it was out of warranty, many found themselves facing mounting repair costs. The 1965 Falcon, rather than building on its early promise, became a victim of Ford's own success, obsolete almost overnight and left to fade into the shadows of its far more glamorous sibling. Number 26. 1962 Ford Fairlane first-gen intermediate. Ford introduced the Fairlane in 1962 to plug the gap between the compact Falcon and the full-size Galaxy. Positioned as a midsize before the term was even standard, the Fairlane had a unique opportunity, but Ford squandered it with one of the blandest designs of the decade. Critics and consumers alike were baffled by its appearance, boxy, uninspired, and awkwardly proportioned. The front end looked like it belonged to a different car altogether, and the rear taillights were described as appliance-like in reviews. It was so forgettable that one automotive journalist dubbed it the least styled car of the decade. The Fairlane's engineering also left much to be desired. While it introduced Ford's lightweight small-block V8, The 221 and 260 cubic inch versions were underpowered in real-world use, and many Fairlanes were sold with the gutless inline-six. Ride quality was rough, and insulation from road noise was minimal. Early production units were also plagued by drivetrain vibration issues, and complaints about rattling interiors were common. The Fairlane's intermediate size was intended to appeal to suburban buyers, but it ended up satisfying no one. It was too big to be truly economical, and too small and underwhelming to offer the space and comfort of a full-size car. Add to that a lack of compelling trim options or performance variants, and the 1962 Fairlane quickly became an afterthought in Ford's showroom. Sales were moderate, but Ford knew it had missed the mark. The model was heavily revised just 2 years later, signaling how poorly the original concept had landed. Today, the 1962 Fairlane is remembered more for what it could have been than what it was, a half-hearted answer to a question nobody really asked. Number 25. 1968 Ford Torino Squire Station Wagon. In 1968, Ford introduced the Torino as a mid-size alternative to the full-size Galaxy, and part of that lineup included the Torino Squire Station Wagon. On paper, the wagon had modern styling and family-friendly utility. In practice, it was a mixed bag that turned into a minor disaster thanks to a deeply flawed feature, the dual-action tailgate. This innovative gate could swing open like a door or fold down like a traditional tailgate, a neat idea in theory, but in execution, it created serious safety concerns. Owners quickly discovered that the latch mechanism was prone to failure. In some cases, the tailgate would unlatch while the car was in motion, swinging open unexpectedly into traffic or during turns. Several documented accidents resulted, prompting Ford to quietly update the mechanism, but never issuing a full recall. For families using the Squire as a daily hauler, it was a terrifying defect that undermined confidence in the vehicle. Beyond that notorious flaw, the Torino Squire suffered from typical late 60s Ford build inconsistencies. Fit and finish were hit or miss, with poorly aligned panels, rattling interiors, and subpar paint quality. The heavier wagon variants also put extra strain on the underpowered base engines, and handling was floaty and disconnected. For a car intended to appeal to growing families, it was neither reassuring nor particularly durable. Despite its distinctive faux wood paneling and spacious layout, the 1968 Torino Squire ultimately became one of Ford's more regrettable missteps in the family car market. The innovative tailgate should have been a highlight, but it became a liability, one that, combined with lackluster performance and shaky quality control, earned the car a well-deserved spot on this list. Number 24. 1969 Shelby GT 500. By 1969, the once-feared Shelby GT 500 had become a bloated caricature of its former self. What started as a raw, track-bred street machine in the mid-1960s had evolved into a heavier, over-styled Grand Tourer with far less bite than bark. Though it still housed the formidable 428 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8, the car's added bulk and softened dynamics meant it no longer stood out in an increasingly crowded muscle car market. Aesthetically, the 1969 GT 500 featured elongated fiberglass bodywork, exaggerated scoops, and chunky styling that lacked the original Shelby Mustang's purposeful aggression. It looked fast, but many owners and enthusiasts found the performance underwhelming, particularly when they realized that a more affordable Mach 1 with the same engine delivered nearly identical real-world acceleration. The GT 500 was also plagued with quality inconsistencies, with misaligned panels and frequent complaints about poorly fitting hoods and electrical quirks. Sales fell sharply as customers questioned the value proposition. At nearly $4,500 new, it was among the most expensive Mustangs one could buy, yet it didn't deliver the visceral experience expected from a car carrying Carroll Shelby's name. In fact, the sales collapse was so bad that 789 unsold 1969 GT 500 were revinned and sold as 1970 models just to clear dealer inventories. In retrospect, the 1969 GT 500 marked the end of an era. Carroll Shelby's hands-on involvement had waned, and Ford's marketing department was steering the brand into glossy, style-over-substance territory. The GT500 had become more about appearance than performance, and serious enthusiasts looked elsewhere. What should have been a legend's evolution instead became a cautionary tale of overreach, branding fatigue, and the dangers of style overpowering substance. Number 23. 1967 Ford Thunderbird 4-door Landau. The Thunderbird's transformation from lithe two-seater to plush personal luxury coupe had already drawn criticism by the mid-1960s. But in 1967, Ford took things a step further, or perhaps a step too far, by introducing a 4-door version of the Thunderbird with rear-opening suicide doors. It was an odd and controversial move, aimed at repositioning the T-Bird as a more upscale luxury sedan to rival the likes of Buick and even Lincoln. But instead of elevating the brand, the result was a confused identity and a vehicle few consumers wanted. The new 4-door Landau was heavy, ponderous, and lacked the sleekness or sporty appeal of earlier Thunderbirds. Its elongated body and rear-hinged back doors made for an awkward silhouette, and while the suicide doors offered a novelty, they introduced structural complications and were prone to issues with alignment and sealing. The car also lost much of its handling prowess, feeling more like a Lincoln Continental than a sporty coupe. Inside, the Thunderbird was still loaded with features: swing-away steering column, power accessories, and plush upholstery. But the price tag reflected those luxuries, pushing it into competition with better-executed full-size luxury cars. Buyers didn't bite. Sales of the 4-door T-Bird lagged behind the 2-door version, and critics wondered why the model even existed when Ford already offered full-size sedans across other brands. The 4-door T-Bird was discontinued after 1971, marking a failed attempt at diversification. Today, it remains a quirky footnote in Thunderbird history, an ungainly, misdirected experiment that diluted the car's once sporty image. Rather than appealing to a broader audience, it alienated the faithful and confused everyone else. Number 22. 1968 Ford Torino GT 390. The 1968 Torino GT was Ford's attempt to muscle up its new intermediate line and cash in on the performance craze sweeping Detroit. It had the ingredients on paper: a fastback profile, sporty trim, and the option to spec it with a 390 cubic inch V8. But in reality, the Torino GT proved to be a compromised machine, marred by unbalanced dynamics and fundamental engineering missteps. The problem started with weight distribution. The big block 390 V8 placed a heavy burden on the car's front end, leading to pronounced understeer and nosedive during hard braking. The standard brakes, outdated 4-wheel drums, were wholly inadequate for the car's performance aspirations. Contemporary reviewers noted serious brake fade and recommended disc brakes as a near-mandatory upgrade. Many buyers, unaware of the limits of drum braking on a car this heavy, found out the hard way in real-world driving. Acceleration was decent in a straight line, but the Torino GT lacked the finesse and excitement offered by rivals like the Pontiac GTO or Chevrolet Chevelle SS. The suspension setup favored comfort over control, leading to a wallowy ride with vague steering feel. Reliability wasn't stellar either, with reports of overheating issues on early 390-equipped models and premature wear in the front-end components due to the weight imbalance. Although the Torino GT had the looks of a performance car, it couldn't deliver consistently where it mattered. It ended up being a muscle car in name only, flashy, yes, but lacking the precision and poise to earn real credibility. Buyers soon gravitated toward more balanced competitors, and the 390 Torino GT became just another example of how looks can't make up for flawed engineering. Number 21. 1966 Mercury Comet Cyclone GT. Mercury's answer to the muscle car revolution came in the form of the 1966 Comet Cyclone GT, a name that promised thunderous performance but ultimately delivered mediocrity. It looked the part with racing stripes, GT badging, and available bucket seats, and under the hood sat a 390 cubic inch V8 rated at 335 horsepower. But despite those promising specs, the Cyclone GT was a disappointment on the street and strip alike. The big block V8 was simply too heavy for the Comet's aging platform, creating a front-heavy balance that punished handling and responsiveness. Nose dive under braking and tire chirping understeer in corners were routine complaints. The manual steering lacked precision, and the suspension tuning didn't do much to instill confidence. Buyers expecting the agility of a GTO or the raw punch of a Fairlane GT were let down. Even in a straight line, performance was underwhelming for the era. Quarter-mile times were respectable but not class-leading, and off-the-line traction issues made real-world performance hit or miss. Period testers called the Cyclone GT muscular but unrefined, and few saw it as a serious contender in the muscle car wars. Reliability wasn't its strong suit either. Early Cyclone GTs were known for clutch and transmission problems, especially when paired with the 4-speed manual. Engine bay heat management was poor, leading to vapor lock and overheating in hotter climates. And because the Cyclone GT was neither fish nor fowl, not a true luxury coupe nor a serious muscle car, it struggled to find an audience. Sales were modest, and Mercury never fully committed to the Cyclone GT as a halo model. Today, it serves as a case study in how muscle car formulas could go wrong: a big engine, a flashy badge, and little else to back it up. Number 20. 1966 Ford Galaxy 7-liter. When Ford introduced the Galaxy 7-liter in 1966, it hoped to bridge the gap between luxury and performance, offering buyers a powerful full-size coupe with upscale features. On paper, it looked promising: a 428 cubic inch V8, bucket seats, center console, and unique badging. But the reality was a mismatched and ultimately disappointing package that satisfied neither the muscle car fan nor the luxury cruiser crowd. At nearly 400 pounds, the Galaxy 7-liter was too large and softly sprung to handle like a performance car. Despite its 345 horsepower, the car felt ponderous and floated across the road, suffering from vague steering and a lack of chassis rigidity. Body roll was pronounced in corners, and drum brakes, still standard, struggled to control the car's mass under repeated hard stops. Even period magazines noted the mismatch, calling it a big car trying hard to be something it's not. The 7-liter did have straight-line speed, but it couldn't hold a candle to intermediate muscle cars like the Chevelle SS 396 or Plymouth GTX when it came to driver engagement or value. Its luxury aspirations were also hampered by mediocre interior quality and aging styling. The extra trim and badging did little to differentiate it from lesser Galaxies, and most consumers viewed it as an overpriced option with little real benefit. Sales were underwhelming. The model lasted just 2 years before being shelved, and the 7-liter name quietly disappeared from Ford's lineup. Today, it's remembered as an oddball, a muscle luxury hybrid that didn't excel in either category. Rather than creating a standout vehicle, Ford built a compromise that fell short on nearly every front, leaving the 7-liter Galaxy as a forgotten chapter in the performance car era. Number 19. 1965 Mercury Montclair Breezeway. By 1965, the Mercury Montclair was already struggling to define itself in a crowded field of full-size sedans. In a last-ditch attempt at distinctiveness, Ford gave the Montclair a feature no one asked for: the Breezeway retractable rear window. While the power backlight was intended to improve cabin ventilation and add a touch of futurism, it turned out to be more gimmick than innovation. The motorized mechanism was prone to failure, and the awkward rear glass angle created styling that many buyers found strange and off-putting. Beyond its novelty window, the Montclair was burdened with an outdated design and platform that failed to compete with more modern offerings from GM and Chrysler. Its ride was floaty, the steering loose and braking subpar. The 390 V8 provided decent thrust, but fuel economy was abysmal even by 1960s standards. Drivers often complained about poor handling in emergency maneuvers, and the car's long overhangs made parking in tight spots a chore. Build quality was inconsistent, with squeaks, rattles, and electrical gremlins common among early production examples. The breezeway mechanism, in particular, was a frequent source of owner frustration, with stuck motors and leaky seals showing up after just a few seasons of use. As a result, the car's resale value plummeted, and buyers began to see it as more of a novelty than a legitimate contender in the full-size luxury market. Mercury dropped the breezeway rear window after 1966, quietly admitting that the concept had run its course. Today, the 1965 Montclair is remembered as a curious dead end in automotive design, a car with one flashy trick that failed to compensate for a laundry list of shortcomings. It was a bold idea poorly executed, and one of Mercury's more regrettable experiments. Number 18. 1962 Ford Thunderbird Sports Roadster. Ford tried to recapture the original Thunderbird's sporty image with the 1962 Sports Roadster, a special edition of the convertible T-Bird that featured a fiberglass tonneau cover and Kelsey Hayes wire wheels. It looked like a two-seater at a glance, bringing back the visual proportions of the original 1955 model. But while it was visually striking, the execution left much to be desired. In practice, the Sports Roadster was one of the most impractical and troublesome Thunderbirds ever made. The fiberglass tonneau cover was heavy, awkward to remove, and limited rear seat access, effectively turning a four-seater into a two-seater without the benefit of actually shedding any weight. Worse yet, the Kelsey Hayes wire wheels, a key styling feature, became a mechanical liability. Reports quickly surfaced of cracked spokes, wheel separations, and even catastrophic failures at highway speeds. One of the most notable incidents involved none other than Elvis Presley, whose wheel collapsed while driving, leading to a tire blowout. Ford was forced to recall the wire wheels and retrofit them with reinforced designs. Under the hood, the Sports Roadster used the standard 390 V8, which was powerful but burdened by the car's hefty weight. Handling remained sluggish, and the Roadster was no more agile than its hardtop sibling. The added flair did little to improve the driving experience. In fact, the weight of the accessories arguably made it worse. The Sports Roadster was offered for only 2 years, and fewer than 500 were produced in 1962. While highly collectible today due to rarity, it's remembered as a case of style over substance. It was a nostalgic gimmick, dressed up to look fast and exclusive, but fundamentally flawed in concept and compromised in execution. Number 17. 1968 Mercury Montego. When Mercury launched the Montego nameplate in 1968, it was meant to refresh the brand's mid-size offerings. Unfortunately, what arrived was a car that looked and felt like an afterthought, a rebadged Ford Fairlane with little to offer in a highly competitive segment. With a bland design, uninspiring performance, and forgettable features, the 1968 Montego quickly cemented itself as one of Mercury's more forgettable failures of the decade. While it came in several body styles, coupe, sedan, and wagon, none stood out visually. The styling was derivative, marked by slab sides and a dull front fascia that failed to compete with the cleaner, more stylish lines of the Chevrolet Chevelle or the Plymouth Satellite. Inside, materials were average at best, and while the top trims offered simulated wood and additional chrome, the overall feel was still budget-oriented. Performance options included 6-cylinder engines and several V8, including the 302 and 390, but none delivered standout driving dynamics. Handling was vague, braking performance with drum setups was middling, and road noise was poorly isolated. Testers at the time described it as uninspired and undistinguished, damning words for a car in a hotly contested market. Worse still, quality control and assembly inconsistencies plagued the first-year Montegos. Reports of electrical problems, misaligned panels, and early rust in wheel arches were common, even on relatively new examples. The model's sales lagged behind competitors, and Mercury was forced to do a substantial redesign just 2 years later in a bid to remain relevant. The 1968 Montego wasn't catastrophically bad, but it was utterly unremarkable, a placeholder in Mercury's lineup that failed to stand out in any category. In a decade full of bold innovation, the Montego was a dull misstep that quickly faded from memory. Number 16. 1961 Mercury Monterey Meteor 800. The 1961 Mercury Monterey marked a turning point, and not for the better. That year, Mercury abandoned its bespoke platforms and began sharing bodies with Ford's full-size models. The result was a Monterey that felt like a dressed-up Ford Galaxy, only with a slightly higher price tag and less brand clarity. In base trim, the car was badged as the Meteor 800, a name that confused buyers and further muddied Mercury's identity. The downsizing of the Monterey was meant to align Mercury more closely with Ford's volume strategy, but the cost was steep. The unique styling, engineering, and upscale image that once defined Mercury were replaced with generic sheet metal and uninspired trim. Critics noticed, with one period reviewer commenting that the 61 Mercury could pass for a Ford on a foggy day. It lacked the refinement and prestige expected of a premium offering, while still costing more than its Ford cousin. Mechanically, the Monterey/Meteor offered a range of engines from the 223 six-cylinder to the 390 V8. Performance was decent but undistinguished, and the car's dynamics were more akin to a fleet vehicle than a mid-tier luxury model. The interiors were bland, and many owners complained of rattles, leaks, and uneven panel fitment, signs that Mercury's quality had taken a backseat during the transition. Sales took a hit, and the Meteor name would soon be shifted to an entirely different intermediate model, further compounding Mercury's brand confusion. In hindsight, the 1961 Monterey represents the beginning of a long identity crisis for Mercury. It was a rebadge in the worst way, a car with no clear purpose, built to fill a corporate niche rather than inspire consumer loyalty. Number 15. 1962 Ford Galaxy 500. The 1962 Ford Galaxy 500 should have been a flagship success. Ford gave it a new look for that model year, with cleaner sides and a more modern profile. But a penny-pinching design decision undermined the entire effort and ended up costing Ford dearly in the full-size sales wars. In a misguided cost-saving move, Ford used the same basic roofline for both two-door and four-door Galaxies, resulting in a generic silhouette that lacked the sleek pillarless hardtop styling that buyers had come to expect. That single decision made the Galaxy look boxier and more conservative than its chief rival, the Chevrolet Impala, which featured a rakish roofline and glitzy detailing. While the Impala oozed showroom appeal, the Galaxy looked like a fleet car dressed up with chrome. Buyers noticed. In 1962, Chevrolet outsold Ford significantly in the full-size market, and styling was a major reason why. The Galaxy's mechanicals were solid, and engine options ranged from the mild 223 inline-six to potent V8s like the 406. But even the power of those high-performance engines couldn't offset the car's styling misstep. Testers at the time called it sturdy but forgettable, and the enthusiasm seen with earlier Galaxies had clearly cooled. Additionally, early 62 Galaxies were prone to rust in the lower quarters and trunk areas, a problem exacerbated in Salt Belt states. The car also suffered from poor resale value compared to the Impala, and lacked standout features that would give it a second wind in the used market. Ultimately, the 1962 Galaxy 500 wasn't a terrible car, it was worse, a bland one. It embodied Ford's conservative, safe approach to design at the expense of excitement, and it paid the price in lost sales and consumer apathy. Number 14. 1960 Mercury Park Lane. The 1960 Mercury Park Lane was the tail end of an era of excess, and it showed. At nearly 18 feet long and weighing over 300 pounds, this chrome-laden beast was a monument to late 50s Detroit design. But while GM had mastered the art of flamboyant styling with grace, Mercury's execution came off as awkward and overwrought. The Park Lane's massive proportions and excessive ornamentation made it look more like a rolling jukebox than a sophisticated luxury car. Under the hood, the 430 cubic inch V8 delivered plenty of torque, but struggled with reliability. It was thirsty even by 1960 standards and had a reputation for valve and oiling issues. Worse still, the heavy body and underdeveloped suspension created an unbalanced ride. Handling was floaty, braking distances were long, and steering feedback was vague at best. This wasn't a car that inspired confidence behind the wheel. It was more of a rolling living room and not a well-built one. Interior quality was another weak point. Though plush at first glance, materials wore quickly, and fit and finish left much to be desired. Early park lanes were also plagued by electrical glitches and rattling trim pieces. Add to that the dated push-button transmission and overcomplicated dashboard controls, and you had a car that looked futuristic but felt like a maintenance nightmare. Buyers weren't fooled. Mercury's sales slumped in 1960, and the Park Lane was quietly demoted in prestige just a few years later. As one historian put it, the '60 Mercury had all the size and none of the flair. It was a last gasp of Baroque bloat in a market rapidly moving toward clean lines and modern restraint, and it missed the mark entirely. Number 13. 1967 Mercury Cougar XR7. The 1967 Mercury Cougar XR7 was designed to be a more refined, European-inspired cousin to the Mustang, a personal luxury coupe with a touch of class. It looked the part with hidden headlamps, sequential rear turn signals, and wood-grain interior accents. But while the XR7 trim added style, it also introduced a host of complex features that quickly became liabilities for owners. The vacuum-operated headlight covers, for example, were impressive when new, flipping open like magic when the car was started. But these systems were notoriously unreliable. Many owners found themselves driving around with one headlight stuck shut and the other stuck open, a problem that only got worse as the vacuum lines aged or cracked. Likewise, the flashy sequential taillights often fell out of sync, leading to confusing and illegal turn signals. The XR7 interior featured toggle switches, analog clocks, and additional lighting, but these electrical components were another common source of failure. Mercury's wiring harnesses in the late 1960s weren't known for durability, and as these cars aged, electrical gremlins became a nightmare. Many XR7s spent more time in the shop for diagnostics than they did on the road. Performance was decent with available 289 and 390 V8s, but the Cougar's heavier body and softer suspension made it less agile than a Mustang and more difficult to drive aggressively. It lacked the raw appeal of a pony car and didn't quite deliver on the luxury promised by its price tag. Though the Cougar was a sales success in its first year, many early XR7 owners grew disillusioned with the car's mounting repair costs and spotty reliability. What should have been Mercury's breakout hit became a symbol of over-engineering gone wrong, a flashy, flawed machine that promised sophistication but delivered frustration. Number 12. 1961 Lincoln Continental Convertible. The 1961 Lincoln Continental is often praised for its clean, modern design and elegant suicide doors, a styling masterstroke that redefined American luxury. But in convertible form, it carried a dark side, technical overcomplexity. This wasn't just a soft top. It was an electro-hydraulic engineering puzzle involving multiple relays, motors, switches, and hydraulic cylinders. The result: one of the most failure-prone convertible mechanisms ever to grace a luxury car. When it worked, the Continental's power top was a marvel. The trunk opened in reverse, the top folded neatly into a cavity, and the whole process was automated. But when it didn't, which was often, owners were stuck with a partially folded roof, a jammed trunk, or a blown hydraulic line. Troubleshooting the mechanism required either a specialist mechanic or a degree in electrical engineering. As these cars aged, the system became notorious for failures, particularly when exposed to moisture, road salt, or long-term storage. Beyond the roof issues, the '61 Continental convertible suffered from electrical gremlins elsewhere: power windows that stuck, door locks that failed, and indicator lights that dimmed or flickered. Though beautifully styled and solidly built overall, the car's wiring harness and switchgear were fragile for daily use. The convertible weighed over 5,000 pounds, making it difficult to maneuver and brutal on brakes and suspension components. Fuel economy was abysmal, and tire wear was accelerated by the vehicle's mass. While the fixed-roof sedan versions earned their place in automotive history, the convertible's dazzling complexity became its Achilles heel. To this day, collectors warn newcomers about restoring these cars. Parts are scarce, and just getting the roof to function properly can cost thousands. Beautiful though it may be, the 1961 Continental convertible is the textbook example of how form can overshadow function. Number 11's 1966 Lincoln Continental convertible. By 1966, Lincoln's Continental convertible had grown even more opulent and even more problematic. With every conceivable power feature packed into a nearly 3-ton body, this flagship cruiser was designed to deliver effortless luxury. But what it delivered in grandeur, it matched in unreliability. Like its predecessors, the 66 Continental Ragtop featured the same electro-hydraulic power top system, now more burdened than ever by the vehicle's increased complexity and electrical load. The retractable roof system remained finicky at best, with a trunk that had to open in reverse before the top could be stowed, all controlled by an array of motors and sensors that were notoriously delicate. As the years passed, owners reported frequent failures in the top mechanism. A single bad relay or hydraulic leak could cripple the system, rendering the car unusable in inclement weather. For many owners, driving a 66 Continental convertible meant a gamble with every top-down cruise. The electrical system was another pain point. The car's elaborate wiring harness powered everything from power vent windows and automatic seatbacks to door locks, and a vacuum-operated headlight dimmer. Failures were common, and diagnosing the culprit often required a skilled technician and considerable patience. Battery drain, blown fuses, and grounding issues plagued many examples. Performance-wise, the 462 cubic inch V8 was smooth but incredibly thirsty. Owners routinely reported single-digit fuel economy, even under modest driving conditions. The sheer weight of the vehicle also meant accelerated wear on suspension and steering components, with floaty handling and poor road feedback. Though visually imposing and luxurious when new, the 1966 Lincoln Continental convertible aged poorly. The promise of effortless luxury became a legacy of mechanical headaches, making it one of the most glamorous but frustrating luxury cars Ford ever built. Number 10's 1960 Ford Falcon 144 inline-6. The 1960 Ford Falcon was a landmark car for the company Ford's first modern compact, designed to battle the Volkswagen Beetle and domestic rivals like the Chevy Corvair. On the surface, it was a massive success, affordable, simple, and easy to drive. But under the hood, it was powered by a feeble 144 cubic inch inline-6 that quickly became known for its underwhelming performance and troubling durability issues. Rated at just 90 horsepower, the 144 was painfully slow even by early 1960s standards. Acceleration from 0 to 60 often took over 18 seconds, and highway passing required nerves of steel. But the bigger issue was the engine's design itself. The oiling system for the valvetrain was notoriously inadequate. Many early Falcons suffered from top-end oil starvation, leading to premature wear in the rocker arms and valve guides. In extreme cases, the engines developed audible ticking, valve lash issues, and even seized components within the first 30,000 miles. Mechanics of the era developed workarounds, including drilling or slotting head bolts to allow better oil flow to the top end. But for owners expecting simple reliability from a new car, these solutions came far too late. Adding insult to injury, the Falcon also lacked sound insulation and ride refinement, making it feel cheap even when new. Despite these issues, the Falcon sold well, but that was due more to its price than its quality. Within a few years, Ford revised the engine lineup and improved oiling designs, but the damage was done. Early Falcons earned a reputation as slow, fragile, and noisy, a far cry from the no-hassle economy car image Ford had hoped to project. The 1960 Falcon's shortcomings remind us that even bestsellers can fall short under the hood. Number 9. 1969 Mercury Marauder X100. The 1969 Mercury Marauder X100 was Mercury's attempt to craft a performance-oriented personal luxury car, a niche that Pontiac's Grand Prix and Buick's Riviera had already begun to define. But instead of creating a refined blend of power and prestige, Mercury produced a lumbering two-door land yacht that suffered from a confused identity and even worse execution. The X100 came standard with a massive 429 cubic inch V8, bucket seats, rear fender skirts, and a distinctive fastback roofline. On paper, it was a compelling package. On the road, it was a disappointment. Despite its big block muscle, the X100 was more cruiser than bruiser. Weighing over 200 pounds and riding on a softly sprung full-size chassis, the Marauder wallowed through corners and felt disconnected from the road. Test drivers complained of numb steering, weak braking, and suspension tuning more suited to a luxury barge than a performance coupe. Straight-line speed was respectable, but the driving experience was devoid of excitement. Build quality didn't help its case. Reports of rattling trim, early paint fade, and drivetrain vibration were common, especially in early production models. The car's styling, while bold, wasn't universally loved, with its pinched nose and rear fender skirts lending it a slightly awkward, almost cartoonish profile. The X100 was expensive too. At over $4,100, it cost more than a Mustang Mach 1 or even some Lincolns. Buyers weren't convinced. Only 635 were sold in 1969, and a paltry 646 in 1970 before the model was discontinued entirely. Today, the Marauder X100 stands as a cautionary tale, a car caught between muscle and luxury that satisfied neither audience. It promised style and speed, but delivered bulk and blandness, making it one of the most forgettable Mercury flops of the decade. Number 8. 1962 Mercury Meteor. The 1962 Mercury Meteor was born out of corporate strategy, not consumer demand, and it showed. Ford slotted the Meteor between the compact Comet and the full-size Monterey in an effort to target mid-priced mid-size buyers. But the result was a muddled, anonymous vehicle that never quite found its place. Essentially a rebadged Ford Fairlane with minor trim differences, the Meteor offered little reason for anyone to choose it over its Ford sibling, or Mercury's other offerings. Visually, the Meteor was uninspiring. Its boxy, slab-sided profile and bland grille lacked distinction. Even its badge work was minimal, making it difficult to distinguish from other Ford Motor Co. products. Inside, the cabin was Spartan, and materials quality lagged behind rivals. The car's dimensions made it too large to feel truly compact and too small to offer the comfort of a full-size model, stranding it awkwardly in the middle. The Meteor came with Ford's new lightweight V8, so the 221 and 260 cubic inch small blocks, which were technically advanced but underwhelming in performance. Handling was passable, but ride quality suffered from cheap suspension tuning, and the car's insulation did little to block out road or engine noise. Assembly quality varied, and early models were known for door alignment problems, drivetrain vibration, and leaky weather stripping. Sales figures reflected this lack of enthusiasm. Fewer than 69,000 were built in 1962, with numbers falling below 51,000 for 1963. Mercury dropped the model after just 2 years, tacitly admitting the experiment had failed. The Meteor was a classic case of badge engineering gone wrong, a car built to fill a corporate niche, not to win hearts or minds. Forgotten by history and unloved by collectors, the Meteor is a ghost in Mercury's troubled lineage. Number 7. 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. The 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 is one of the most legendary names in muscle car history. but also one of the most misunderstood and underwhelming cars of its time. Built to homologate Ford's new 429 cubic inch NASCAR engine for competition use, the Boss 429 had all the makings of a street monster. Massive engine bay mods, a huge hood scoop, and a hand-fitted powerplant gave it a fearsome image. But behind the mystique lay a car that failed to deliver on its potential. The Boss 429 engine, the semi-Hemi 429, was detuned for street use to the point that it produced only marginally better performance than a standard 428 Cobra jet. While officially rated at 375 horsepower, most testers found it slow off the line, difficult to tune, and temperamental in day-to-day driving. The car was heavy, over 800 pounds, and its stiff front springs made it handle poorly on rough roads. Low-end torque was lacking, making it sluggish in city driving and difficult to launch effectively. On top of that, it was extremely expensive. At around $4,800, it was among the priciest Mustangs ever built, and yet offered no real performance edge over a Mach 1 with the 428 CJ, which was significantly cheaper. Insurance costs were sky-high, parts were already scarce, and many dealerships didn't know how to properly service the unique engine. Only 359 were built in 1969, and a further 499 in 1970, making it rare but not especially beloved at the time. Today, the Boss 429 is a prized collectible for its rarity and racing pedigree, but in period it was a dud, a car that looked faster than it was, and became a case of over-engineering that never quite found its groove on the street. Number 6. 1965 Ford Galaxy. The 1965 Ford Galaxy was part of a sweeping redesign that introduced stacked headlights and smoother bodywork, visually appealing at first glance. But underneath the surface, Ford's cost-cutting decisions would turn this generation of full-size cars into some of the most rust-prone vehicles of the 1960s. In a misguided attempt to save production costs, Ford delayed the implementation of improved rust-proofing technologies that had already been developed in-house. The result: Galaxies and many other mid-60s Fords that began to rot alarmingly early in their lifespans. Many owners reported rust appearing within 2 or 3 winters, especially in northern states. Front fenders bubbled, rocker panels disintegrated, and trunk floors turned to flakes. Paint adhesion was poor, and seams were inadequately sealed. It wasn't just cosmetic either. Structural components like subframes and suspension mounts were affected, leading to compromised safety and higher repair bills. The 1965 Galaxy also had other issues. Despite offering a range of V8s and flashy trim levels like the Limited, many models were plagued by drivetrain vibration and suspension rattles. The optional twin I-beam front suspension, while innovative, contributed to poor tire wear and erratic handling. Fit and finish were uneven, and interiors developed squeaks and loosened trim over time. Although the Galaxy sold well in its day, it didn't age gracefully. By the late 1960s, many were already headed for junkyards not because of mechanical failure, but because their bodies had rusted beyond repair. Ford engineers had the tools to prevent this, but the company's decision to delay widespread electro-coating and proper sealing created one of the worst rust reputations in Detroit history. The 1965 Galaxy stands as a textbook example of how neglecting long-term durability can destroy customer trust. Number 5. 1966 Ford Galaxy Cruise-O-Matic transmission. One of the most infamous safety controversies in Ford's history came from a defect that haunted the 1966-1969 Galaxy and millions of other Ford vehicles equipped with the Cruise-O-Matic transmission. The issue wasn't just mechanical, it was deadly. Due to a flawed parking mechanism, these transmissions could slip from park into reverse with no driver input, causing vehicles to roll away unexpectedly. This flaw led to hundreds of accidents and numerous fatalities, many involving parked cars that suddenly reversed into streets, buildings, or people. Internal Ford documents later revealed the company had been aware of the problem early on, but resisted issuing a recall. Instead of addressing the design failure head-on, Ford opted for a low-cost fix, sending warning stickers to car owners advising them to use the parking brake. This decision to warn, not fix, became a notorious example of corporate negligence in the face of public safety. The problem stemmed from the internal detent design of the Cruise-O-Matic, which didn't reliably lock into park unless the lever was perfectly aligned. Even a small misalignment could leave the car resting on the edge of reverse, and when vibrations occurred, it would click into gear. Lawsuits piled up and consumer trust took a serious hit. Beyond the safety issue, the Cruise-O-Matic was known for sluggish shifting and early wear in high-torque applications. Many Galaxy owners complained about harsh downshifts and poor gear engagement, especially after 30,000 miles. Fluid leaks were also common due to weak seals. While Ford eventually redesigned the shifter mechanism in the early 1970s, the damage was done. The 1966 Galaxy and its Cruise-O-Matic-equipped siblings became symbols of how cost-cutting and poor accountability could turn a simple flaw into a tragic headline-grabbing scandal. Number 4. 1960 Lincoln Continental Mark V. The 1960 Lincoln Continental Mark V was the final year of a bloated, overbuilt generation that began in 1958, and its departure was long overdue. At over 500 pounds and stretching more than 19 feet in length, the Mark V was a behemoth by any standard. It was supposed to be Ford's ultra-luxury competitor to Cadillac, but instead became a cautionary tale of excess, poor engineering, and disastrous quality control. Under the hood was a thirsty 430 cubic inch V8 that labored to move the car's enormous bulk. Despite its size, the Mark V wasn't particularly fast or comfortable. Road testers noted a choppy ride, vague steering, and severe body roll in corners. Parking it was a chore, and its dimensions made it impractical even in an era of large cars. To make matters worse, the fuel economy hovered in the 7-9 mpg range, excessive even for luxury standards of the time. What truly doomed the Mark V, however, was its dismal build quality. Welds were often misaligned, panels didn't match up properly, and interior materials wore prematurely. Rattles, squeaks, and electrical issues were common. Some early Mark V's even left the factory with cracked frame welds, a stunning lapse for a car that cost over $7,000 new. Lincoln lost millions trying to sell this generation of Continentals. Sales were so poor that Ford decided to scrap the entire platform in 1961 and start over with a much leaner, more elegant design. The 1960 Mark V was the death rattle of a misguided design philosophy, a lumbering dinosaur built for a market that no longer existed. Today, it's remembered not for prestige, but for being one of the most poorly conceived luxury cars of its time. Number 3. 1960 Edsel Ranger. By 1960, the Edsel brand was on life support. What had launched in 1958 with tremendous hype and massive investment, nearly $250 million, had devolved into a full-blown corporate embarrassment. The 1960 Edsel Ranger was the last gasp of the doomed brand, and it showed. Gone were the unique body panels and over-the-top styling cues of earlier Edsels. Instead, the Ranger was little more than a badge-engineered Ford with minimal distinction. Consumers weren't fooled, and most stayed away entirely. The 1960 Ranger shared its body with the Ford Fairlane, but without the brand identity or emotional appeal that made even the Fairlane marginally successful. The only noticeable difference was a new grille that looked awkward and out of proportion. The car was bland, generic, and clearly a placeholder built only to fulfill contract obligations while Ford wound the brand down. Mechanically, the Ranger wasn't bad. It offered inline-sixes and small V8s with Ford's standard transmissions, but there was nothing to make it desirable. Quality control was spotty, with complaints about ill-fitting trim, rattling doors, and poor interior materials. Dealers were hesitant to stock Edsels, and support for the brand had all but vanished by the time the 1960 model hit showrooms. Sales were disastrous. Fewer than 3,000 units were produced before Ford abruptly pulled the plug in November 1959, making the 1960 Ranger one of the rarest production vehicles of the decade, not by design, but because no one wanted one. It became a cautionary tale of overpromising, market misreading, and branding failure. Today, the 1960 Edsel Ranger stands as the final nail in the coffin for one of the auto industry's greatest flops. A sad, underwhelming end to a car that never lived up to its monumental expectations. Number 2. 1960 Ford Courier Sedan Delivery. Aimed at small businesses and tradesmen, the 1960 Ford Courier Sedan Delivery was a commercial variant of the Ford Falcon, and one of the last of its kind. While sedan deliveries were once popular, the Courier arrived at a time when the market was rapidly shrinking, and this final version failed to meet even modest expectations. It was underpowered, ill-equipped, and quickly outdated, a poorly thought-out vehicle that symbolized the last flicker of a fading concept. Powered by the same 144 cubic inch inline-six found in the base Falcon, the Courier was woefully underpowered, especially when loaded with cargo. With only 90 horsepower and very little torque, even modest inclines strained the engine, and highway speeds felt unsafe when carrying any weight. The 3-speed manual gearbox was clunky, and performance was sluggish at best. Inside, the Courier was bare bones, no rear seats, minimal insulation, and basic instrumentation. Road noise was overwhelming, and build quality was substandard. Rust protection was minimal, leading to early body corrosion, especially around the rear doors and floor pan. The car's low payload capacity and poor ride quality further limited its usefulness compared to small vans and pickups that were beginning to dominate the light commercial market. Ford only sold the Courier for 1 year in this form, and fewer than 6,000 units were produced before the model was dropped. It was a clear signal that the sedan delivery format was no longer viable in the face of changing consumer demands and better alternatives. In hindsight, the 1960 Courier was an outdated solution to a problem no longer being asked. It left no legacy and earned little affection, a ghost in Ford's lineup and one of the most forgettable vehicles they ever put on the road. Number 1. 1969 Ford Limited Country Squire. By the end of the 1960s, the full-size station wagon was reaching its peak as the go-to vehicle for the American family. The 1969 Ford Limited Country Squire, adorned with simulated wood grain and pitched as the ultimate suburban cruiser, should have been the king of the road. But one powertrain decision turned it into a frustrating disappointment: the early implementation of emissions control devices on the big 400 cubic inch V8. While the engine looked impressive on paper, its real-world performance was strangled by early smog control technology that choked power, flattened throttle response, and introduced serious drivability issues. The engine suffered from hot starts, detonation, and rough idling. Acceleration was sluggish, especially critical for a wagon that often carried a full load of passengers and cargo. Worse, the added emissions gear led to more frequent maintenance needs, with vacuum leaks and carburetor problems becoming routine. At nearly 4,800 pounds, the limited wagon was already a heavyweight, and the neutered 400 V8 left it struggling for breath. Fuel economy dipped into the single digits, and owners complained about both performance and reliability. The 3-speed automatic transmission was lazy to downshift, and handling was floaty and disconnected. Brakes were just adequate, not ideal for a car that could be loaded with over a ton of people and gear. Inside, the Country Squire was roomy and stylish, but no amount of simulated wood paneling could hide the fact that the car was past its prime. As the 1970s arrived, wagons like this became poster children for inefficient excess, big, underpowered, and thirsty. The 1969 Limited Country Squire with the choked-down 400 V8 ranks as Ford's most frustrating effort of the decade, a family flagship crippled by poor engineering timing and a dismal preview of the malaise era to come.